We're back on the Cheapy Productions podcast network with the Cheapy Productions podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, no gimmicks guy on the socials, and I'm very pleased to welcome back a man who I've had the pleasure of interviewing several times on a variety of topics. He's a very, very well renowned researcher, filmmaker, author, and his podcast, William Ramsey Investigates, it's one of my personal favorites and up there in the top echelons of podcasting, not only true crime, but several genres. And today we're going to be doing a topic that viewers or a viewer of our previous episode on global death cult, the 764, asked about, and that is theories surrounding the Son of Sam situation. A lot of attention on Son of Sam following that Netflix docu-series, but the tentacles, as you'll see, goes really, really deep. William, I want to welcome you back once again.
Jack, thanks for having me. According to my records, this will be our 7th episode, so lucky 7.
Absolutely. Time does fly. In terms of Berkowitz, I wanted to mention that I've been really taking in your as I said on the pre-show, your Herculean efforts with respect to the Epstein network. You've been cataloging that since the drops in tremendous detail. Very informative stuff. I don't think anybody else can touch the level of detail that yourself and Hans and Sean from Wake the Dead have gotten into. But you mentioned Berkowitz on a recent show and that he actually sent you a letter. So why don't we start off by getting into that a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I've had people who on my show. I've become something of well known about knowing all this because I've had people on my show who know Berkowitz and visit him in jail. And one guy was a guy who wrote a book titled Monster Mirror. His name was Caparelli. He spent 100 hours with him and really got into details and verified stuff and also disabused the public of myths around Berkowitz. But also another one is Criminal Chris. So she, because of a lot of, some of these research communities, they become insular and then they have problems and people infiltrate or make stuff up that other people don't agree with. And that's what's happened around the Son of Sam killing. And so he was thanking me for giving clarity or trying to, separate the chaff from the wheat, so to speak, within that community. So he sent me a nice email. I shared a little bit of it with you in the pre-show. So it is interesting. It's kind of like smaller, like some of these people I research, I'm doing it at a very objective level. And then next thing you know, 10 years later, I'm getting emails from Berkowitz.
Mm-hmm. Wild stuff. What is it about the official story that Berkowitz acted alone that never really completely satisfied anyone? Even, well, I shouldn't say that. Anybody that's taken an objective look at the evidentiary material, that he was this lone wolf type, even decades later, and I think it was behind the impetus for the docu-series.
Yeah, I think it was because the stories of the victims was much different than what the media was telling you. Once Berkowitz was captured, based upon a parking ticket of all things, but people were like, well, that's not the person that I had, and we have those drawings. Like there were police drawings done before Berkowitz was arrested of people who don't look like Berkowitz. Mm-hmm. And then also a lot of the victims that survived. One is Carl Denaro, who I've also interviewed, and who literally wrote a book saying why Berkowitz didn't act alone. He's like, this isn't the guy who shot me. And Carl has a huge metal plate in his head now. He's still alive, thank God. But so I think that's it. Like this isn't a mystery. And then this is one of these events that happens much even like a Epstein. We know it was just him, nobody else. We got our man. We're done. And that was the way it was with Berkowitz. But Berkowitz kind of told a different story. He always talked about being part of a group and that they were up to no good and there were fires and there were networks, there were the Carr family. And a lot of that stuff was detailed and looked into in really one of the great kind of occult parapolitical books of all time by Maury Terry called The Ultimate Evil. And in that Ultimate Evil, it starts with other deaths around the country, something all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast in Stanford Memorial Church of Our Blessed Perry that took place in 1974, before the time of the, what is publicly stated as the time of the Son of Sam murders, which was a fairly short time. I think it was 2 years total. But the way that they go through with this is that is Maury Terry, who actually I found out wrote a couple other books too that aren't very well known and they're out of print. But I'll show those to you. Maybe I can bring them up. It shows that there's a larger environment of criminality, wrongdoing that involved Minot, North Dakota, and there's a bunch of people around this kind of Yonkers area. I think is where Maury Terry lived as well. So I think that it's a lot easier for the police to curtail these investigations and close them and take a victory lap and put the laurel wreaths on their head and say we won, than to actually go, hey, there may be a larger problem. There may be a lot of other people involved in this criminality, and that we have a group. So I think that's the larger problems. And then the evidence kind of plays out. Like Sons of Sam comes out and they're talking about guys drinking blood. One of the Carr brothers literally drinking people's blood in Minot, North Dakota. That's a crime. And is never prosecuted. And then you figure out all this other stuff. They're all involved. They mysteriously die. These networks, like, it feels like almost like a cleanup after I can't remember the number, but after Berkowitz was arrested, I think that there were like 5 or 10 people around them who all committed suicide or met untimely deaths, car accidents, or something like that.
Does the law enforcement approach, and notwithstanding the I believe it's the Queen's DA, Santucci privately and I guess even publicly doubted the lone gunman theory. What do you know of the internal, this dynamic that you talk about? We want to wrap this up. We want to put a bow on it. It reminds me of how many jurisdictions, Texas most notably, are handling the water-based drowning deaths by, really actively ignoring evidence and not putting 2 and 2 together. But what disagreements existed at the time, and why was there resistance, given this reasonable doubt, to reopening the case?
I think it's just a lot easier to finish because this case it was just an incredible psychological operation or some kind of cultural op by whoever was writing these very clever letters that went to a famous journalist. What was his last name? Breslin. Because, even at that time, if you go back, like I did this story show about the psychosphere of New York at that time, it was very corrupt, very criminal related. There were tons of other people getting shot. But then you have these random kids, vulnerable kids out on lovers' lanes or whatever being shot at midnight. And it really captured the intention. Like if you wanted to pull a psychological operation, it would be like a great one. So then when you take all that fear and you go, look, we put an end to it. I don't think it's like something where people wanted to keep looking into. What it did is it kind of had this boomerang effect, is because the cops and everybody in the media stopped looking at it, it created this whole afterworld of like, there's much more to the story. Thus the ultimate evil. And Maury Terry ran a very active research page on Facebook. I can't remember the name. I was involved in it when I was on Facebook. But people were still going through his stuff and reading his book again and getting details and connecting it to the Radin killing, which is out here, which is but attached to like a lot of wrongdoing in Long Island. So there was this kind, and Radin was, I think you can say fairly, he was an occultist as well, which a lot of these guys were, and Berkowitz certainly was, and involved with this park up in Yonkers. So I think that, to answer your question, I think that the incentives were to like, have it not done bookended with a nice bow tie, which it didn't. And I don't think the public. I think that the public really wants that clean ending, that thing that they see in the films where everything's resolved at the end and there's no vagaries or other people involved or other networks. I think it's nice for them to have it, and then they can go on their lives and not be afraid of fear when maybe Berkowitz is thinking there's still other people out there, which they are, because there are great researchers who've tied that this process church that he was acquainted with morphed and turned itself into Best Friends Society in Kanab, Utah. And a lot of these people who are involved in these, it's a very complex organization. Process Church on the surface sounds funny, but it's a very hierarchical and very sophisticated operation run by very intelligent people. And they morphed and really were still around. They just rebranded themselves. They went from the Process Church to the Final Judgment to the Foundation, and then morphed. And I'm trying to remember the girl's name, but she did the research on it. It's Dana Duda, and she literally took these pictures from 1970s around the time of Berkowitz, and people involved on the website of Best Friends. It's the same people. So those people, when Berkowitz said those people were still around, he was right.
Mm-hmm. Was that correct me if I'm wrong, but the Process Church, did Manson have ties to that too?
Correct. There's no question that he was ideologically connected. He called his family the family. That's the way the Process Church was. He knew a lot of the stuff. He drove around on a black bus with a goat on the top. A lot of the Satanism was overlooked by Manson, but he was a skilled hypnotist. But there was like this weird kind of countercultural ferment that took place in Haight-Ashbury, and he was literally right at the epicenter of that. So you had a lot of mind control stuff, occult stuff. You had Kenneth Anger. Bobby Bouzoulet was like living with Kenneth Anger, and then Kenneth Anger's friends with a lot of occultists. And the Process Church was I forget the direct address, but it was very close to where Manson was at that time, around that time in the Haight. And actually, a lot of people don't know this, but the Process Church thought they were so... This is from their own quote from the number 3 guy. His name was Timothy Wiley. He literally said, we thought we were so powerful we were going to control the world, because that's how infiltrated they were. So it's all a secret underground sub rosa infiltration that you never see on the surface. But yeah, so if you look at some of the ideology, Manson, one of the things that's often overlooked, and I can find this quote, but there were 2 founders who were ex-Scientologists. Manson was a clear. So he had gone through Scientology, much like de Grimston and his wife, whose name escapes me now. His real name was Robert Moore, but he took on de Grimston. And Charles Manson once said, de Grimston and I are one. So he didn't say he was a follower of Dick Grimston. He was smart. One of the things about Manson is how intelligent he was. He was a street kid, but he had a high IQ. He understood stuff, and he would read. He read Stranger in a Strange Land by Heinlein, who goes back to like Hubbard and stuff like that, which is all about, it's kind of like a do what thou wilt book in some ways. But he knew things and absorbed things in jail and outside of jail. But his connection to Vincent Bugliosi writes in his book, like the best-selling legal true crime book of all time. There is places to criticize that, but it is Helter Skelter. He writes in his book that the Process Church members came to the jail where Manson was after Manson was talking about it, and then Manson shut up. So they came and said, they gave him the talk, so to speak. So there are a lot of connections, and there's connections between Manson and the OTO as well, and they all kind of overlapped. They really did.
And we won't go down the rabbit hole, but of course you've talked about in your work the connection between some of these groups and Manson specifically, and the CIA being I don't know whether you would say it's an established fact or not, but there's a lot of reasonable, probable grounds to believe that he was an asset of some form with the CIA, correct?
I think so. There was clearly this Operation Chaos stuff. That's a famous book by Tom O'Neill, and that operation included so many other things to destabilize and take malign anti-war forces and the new culture that was growing up that was anti-war and anti-imperial. So this Vietnam War is happening, and there's this huge movement, and they talk about how Haight-Ashbury changed, even kind of with Manson, or something happened in 1978 or 9, where they brought in a lot of really hard drugs and a lot of rough people like Manson. But before that, it was like the summer of love. And the people say that was very authentic. So it really was like people coming together, and it wasn't this kind of like hippie paradise that people perceive it as today. And I think that the powers that be, the ruling elite, the oligarchy, didn't want that social change movement. And so a lot of their people came in my opinion, my reading, Leary, Manson, Jolly West of all people, and they really changed it. So there's strange things about Manson's life. Why did he get out of jail at certain times? Why wasn't he arrested at certain times? There was a huge like car theft thing he was involved in the valley, and they came and got like investigated, and all of a sudden Manson doesn't get arrested. And O'Neill goes into that. So there's suspicious things about him. There's really suspicious things around the Symbionese Liberation Army, which is 1974. And that is also the guy who was the head of that. He went by the name Sinkay. His name was Donald DeFries. He was the same like Manson. So you can see these parallels. He's kind of manipulated. He's in jail. He gets out at strange times. He's literally, DeFries, they open the door and just let him walk out. And then he shows up and starts this cult that's kind of like the Manson family. He starts his own cult, and he starts accruing people. And none of the African Americans trusted him, which is a huge tell, because they thought that he was a Fed from the beginning. But a lot of well-meaning, left-wing white liberals followed him, and then including eventually Patty Hearst. So, and then it ended up in just disaster. Like it ended up in South Central in a shootout, and they all died. So you can see Manson as part of a larger topography of some kind of political manipulation. Literally, DeFries's handler was a guy involved. He was a CIA agent. We know his name, Colston Westbrook, who literally worked at the Phoenix program in Vietnam. And if you want to have a bad day, you can research that, because a lot of really malevolent people were involved in that, much like Michael Aquino.
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. The military linkage in these, all you have to do is look at pattern recognition, and if you know what to look for, you're going to see it. In terms of Berkowitz, the one of the aspects of the docuseries that they pointed out was that the composite sketches didn't they weren't all the same. They didn't match Berkowitz. Some of them just ridiculously bad. How significant is this, and do you think it points to some evidence that there were possible accomplices such as members of the Carr family?
100%. I don't think Berkowitz was. I mean, he's a bright guy, but he was not a literary guy. Is my understanding. No college, military. It's another ties, these military guys. But the letters that are sent to the public through Breslin and some of these other characters, they're very sophisticated. They're really good pieces of literature. They're dark, but like, there's blood in the gutter and all these things. Like if you read those for that kind of dark impact, you realize that somebody of some literary skill pre-AI put those together. And it's also that sophistication is reflected in the Zodiac, where he's literally using very super sophisticated ciphers. Like it's not even like a simple code, like A equals this. It's like a heavy code that they had to get these like college guys who taught English or whatever to like decipher the whole thing. So I think that there's others involved. When you look through it and really analyze the entirety of the story of just Berkowitz being the perp, he had to be like super sophisticated. It doesn't make sense. There's a group, and he even admits to it. He even says, we were trying to like terrorize the entirety of New York City, which is what they did.
He initially blamed the famous demon dog owned by his neighbor that ordered the killings, and then later claimed he was a part of occult involved in these ritualistic murders. How do you view his changing stories? Is it, the demon dog, maybe he was going for a not criminally responsible or something, but is it manipulation, attention seeking, remorse, or something else?
I think he was on board in the cult. I mean that in a general sense, up until late '80s. So I think that he didn't have any interest in telling the truth after he was caught. So putting out whatever people wanted to hear or anything was much better than saying he was in a cult that involved like sacrificing German shepherds and stuff. Because there were dead dogs found around,
Yeah.
and there's other murders that took place. There was one in Van Cortlandt Park. And there were other things that were associated maybe with sacrifice. These are the ones they just got caught with. So I think that later then he was like, oh, I shouldn't really talk about this. I put this video up. This is his first person statement about him in the process video. I don't know if you can play the audio, but it really is interesting because he's talking about that. So at a certain point when he had his, transformation, I do believe he's an authentic Christian now, like he's tried, but I don't think he can really tell the full truth. And I don't think he would want to, because I think he's probably involved in things that are much even darker that people don't even know the right questions to ask from but if people know the story, he was a rampant arsonist. Like they were setting hundreds of fires and stuff like that. It's often left out of the story. He's also driving around in weird ways. He's connected to elites. There's doctors. There's Lord. They're going into the Magical Child, which is a very notorious kind of epicenter for the occult at that time in Manhattan. It was run by a guy named Herman Slater, and it ties to Lavenda. So he's like, if he really gets in there, he's exposing a lot of people, just like I said earlier, who were still around. I mean, I think maybe they're passing away, but I think at that time they really were around. So I think he had serious concerns, and these are very hardcore players, and a lot of those people they wouldn't want to be exposed, much like people in the Epstein network.
You mentioned, there was some malfeasance around people connected to the case that died under what has been termed suspicious circumstances, shortly after his arrest. I'm thinking of John and Michael Carr, amongst others. How did these deaths play into, the alternate theories? And is there any credible link based on, the research to date to the situation?
Well, there's definitely, like he ended up talking about the Carr brothers. So they were known to him for sure. And then the researchers kind of followed up. I'm pretty sure Maury Terry talked about him, if my memory serves me correct. So I think that they were involved in that, and the Carr father. And they talk about that in some of those letters, if I remember correctly, they reference like the street or something of the Carr family. And he's been seen in that general environment, Berkowitz. So I do think that there's valid, credible information that they're involved in that kind of stuff. And there's other third-party corroborating stories, much like what I said about the guys in Carr. One of the Carr brothers was in the military, and Minot, North Dakota is an Air Force base. And they said there was satanic activity going there. And that's the basis of why Arliss Perry was supposedly killed, because she was from Minot, and she was an active Christian, and she was trying to transform people, and she might have rubbed people the wrong way. And those process people, like I've heard Wiley, he has a very strong anti-Christian animus. And that's really a component of Satanism, whether it's Crowley or anybody else. So some of these people are very sinister, and they do bad things. And I think, killing somebody in a church is pretty intense. And that's kind of the whole ultimate, like I've done other shows on like satanic activity in churches. It really does happen. I don't think it's that common, but it's like the ultimate desecration is to do that. And I think that one of these Satanists, they get farther down the road and they end up doing stuff. One of the interesting things of Berkowitz's own statement is that the occult for him was like being pulled out into a riptide in the ocean or an undercurrent where he just felt like he was surprised where he was when he got there because he wasn't born in. His dad is a very like attentive guy. Like his son has gone to the dark side, but like he wasn't brought up in that satanic world. But he said he just got pulled away from shore, and when he got out to sea, he was like, "Wow, I've come a long way." And I think it's a good metaphor for what happens to a lot of these people. They just get misguided and pulled out into places where they never thought they would be by that time.
You know, going back into the scene in New York City during the time, it was definitely one characterized by fear, and you know, you've talked about a lot in different contexts the satanic panic. What role did that play in the development and persistence of these series? And just as kind of a sidebar, with your work on the Epstein network, I find it, you know, based on going through all the drops, you and Sean and Hans have been able to point out, you know, significant evidence of high level satanic activity from, you know, real nightmare fuel stuff like the jerky, the killing of babies, the cannibal, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think it's the public at large not being able to accept that this degree of evil exists in society and has for almost since time immemorial up until the modern day, and it just acts as you know, a convenient scapegoat for some of this stuff rather than getting at the truth?
Yeah, it's hard to comprehend. To think that Epstein is a literal cannibal and he and his buddies are eating people is hard to believe. I believe Epstein is a cannibal. So I think it's a lot easier. And the satanic panic is usually proffered or put out by Satanists. You're panicking by making a complaint. So that's what I've found out. Like, because these are very harmful people. Berkowitz caused a lot of misery. There's parents whose kids came home in a box, amongst other things, this fear. And these are like part and parcel of satanic networks, is to aggregate power, monopolize information and wealth, and then inflict it on other people. Like, I think that's Manson family, everything like that. These are all continuity of behavior. But I think that the modern age, they think that this is something from the past. Witches are from the past. And there's no need to like get panicked or anything. But I think that's part of the cover-up. I think there's just huge cover-ups with the process, with the son of Sam, with Epstein. And people are still trying to figure out Epstein. I mean, these drops, the majority of the drops were completed by January 30th of 2026. And even now today, people are like, oh, hey, I just found out that people were writing Jeffrey Epstein, calling him a magus. Like, this is a heavy-duty occult term. And I just heard that within the past week. I hadn't heard that before. So somebody discovered people are sending him these I mean, in addition to weird references to mirrors and scrying, or saying he's Lucifer and Milton. I mean, it just goes on and on. So I think the satanic panic kind of concept put out on the public is a kind of psyop, because there's clearly witches and modern warlocks and things like that. Like, I've done so much work on the West Memphis 3. It's just redolent with that whole case from beginning to end and to the present. I literally got sent something about Eccles' new book. Like, he's the core member of that whole West Memphis 3. So it's still around. And I think that as the culture of the United States has moved from a kind of primarily Christian culture away from that, I think it's a real culture shift in a negative way, because it allowed people like Epstein to operate for such a long period of time. He was covered up for 3 or 4 decades. Like, when did he start like eating people? Like, because he was brought into whatever network he was in when he was in his late 20s, and he died at 66. So he's you know, I mean, he got rehabbed in 2007, and then Bannon, who's like supposedly a Christian, is out there trying to rehab freaking Epstein in 2019. But I think the satanic panic myth is stuff. I've done shows on that recently. That it's a lot of those people who are saying satanic panic are also in the false memory syndrome foundation, or false memory whatever foundation, FMSF, and they're like all these people who overlap with Operation Chaos and all this stuff like that. Literally, Jolly West, who I mentioned earlier, who's in there around like this culture change taking place in San Francisco, is on a board member saying there are false memories involved in this. I mean, you just can't not write this stuff. And then you see Epstein financing, like this back person who's financing these fronts companies. So you think this false memory syndrome foundation is independent, and then you go, who's financing it? And you see Epstein financing things about cultural change, about deviant art, about things in the Middle East, and you go, oh, so people are putting these people forward. One of the interesting things is the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. One of these women who's on there is in Epstein's files and literally sat at trial for Ghislaine Maxwell. So people have to understand the whole cultural engineering and the systematic kind of deception upon the American people may be financed by. I mean, imagine taking money from a cannibal and doing that. Like literally, there's just more and more revelations. One of his victims is literally saying, I think Jeffrey Epstein's role on this earth was to bring back hell. Like she's not saying like he was a nice guy or a philanthropist. She was like, he wanted to bring back Babylon. And if you remember, like the Bible, one of the big kind of like dualities between the prophets and the priest of Baal or something, one of the other ones is the difference between the holy city of Jerusalem and Babylon. So they're always were seeing Babylon as an antagonist and an enmity with the people who helped write the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it is linked to Son of Sam in a broad perspective. But if you look at the work that you've done and gone into the minutia, from deviant art to links to modern, so to speak, transhumanism, you see that the media at large, the mass media, whatever that is, they really seem to be focused on one aspect of it, and that's the pedophilia, which I think you pointed out is definitely there, but it's so much broader and deeper than that. Do you see there an official, for lack of a better word, mechanism to suppress this information? That again, you're looking at pattern recognition, Zodiac, Berkowitz, Manson. You just have to see that there's military links, Aquino, et cetera, et cetera. Do you see that as part of the plan to distract with the pedophilia, which is bad enough, but also poo-poo the other even more or equally as ominous connections, and like you had pointed out in a recent show as well, they've got another Epstein island, so to speak, from one of Trump's. I guess it's Kirshner, and he's married to one of Trump's daughters, and they seem to be buying another island, and on and on and on. It repeats itself. Do you see that as something purposeful on behalf of the non-alternative media, whatever that means?
I think that one of the things is involved with people like Epstein and the Epstein network is control of information and buying and owning and sending people forward who are sympathetic journalists. And you see that with a lot of these guys. They're financing and supporting guys, even in the traditional media, and now in the alternate media, there's people involved. One of the interesting things that I saw was a researcher, her name was Tara Palmieri, who's done a lot of great work on Epstein. And she's asking this guy, Michael Tracy, who's like, oh yeah, you're a moral panic. So the new corollary to satanic panic is moral panic. So if you're upset about Epstein, you're a moral panic or a panican, or these new terms that are meant to make you feel stupid or look like you're like less than sane or something like that. But she asked him, are you getting paid by anybody? And he didn't answer. He didn't just come out and say no. He's like, well, why are you asking that question? And his eyes are blinking, like every body language giveaway was just, every tell on earth was like all over his face, in my opinion. So I think that these people are out there today at this present, and there are elements. One of the things when I was reading through the Epstein files is you could see his relationship with journalists. And actually, I saw one the other day where he got an email from somebody, and it was somebody from, I think it was the New Yorker or one of these um, major magazines, and this guy was asking, not Jeffrey, but he's asking somebody, I'm doing a story on Jeffrey Epstein. I know you're friends. I would like to ask you some more questions. Is there a time we could talk? Somebody took that email and sent it to Epstein. So Epstein's knowing somebody's talking about him. And you see that all that time, like, oh, Virginia Giuffre's talking. That's in the Epstein files. He knows Giuffre's talking. He has a collection of hundreds and hundreds of pages of every article written about him in Miami or Florida newspapers. And he's very aware of what's going on with books and things like that. And he's friends with this guy, Michael Wolff, who like wrote a negative thing about Trump, like the Fire and the Fury. But I don't think he wrote anything negative about Epstein. So I think that these guys, and this is just one microcosm. This is just one node on a network. Think about all these other guys. They don't want anything written about them ever. And a lot of the payouts and a lot of the civil cases, one of the reasons that, in my opinion, why they're paid out is because they're assigned NDAs. So none of the victims come forward and tell their real stories, which are horror stories. They're getting worse and worse. Like, it's not like, oh, this was really just a pedophile. No, this was like gang rapes. This is people who are prepubescent victims, babies missing, operations on tables at Tell Ranch in Zorro, New Mexico. Like, when you look at the whole thing of what they're doing, like almost like some kind of evil Bond villain type stuff, like it shocks the conscience. Like, it's really bad. So to answer your question, I do think that there's a concerted effort to control. I think that's narrative control. I think they're using, like, how are we going to spin all this stuff? They're using sophisticated assets to allay suspicion, to deflect, to cover up. And it's happening in real time. And if you put on your kind of they live glasses and watch some of these guys talk, they stand out. You can tell that they're either getting paid. In my opinion, it's easy for me that they're not looking at the facts. They're just trying to make people, they're using the techniques of like perception control on people, like, oh, you're stupid, you're a moral panic, or there's nothing there, or he's a construct, or this, you're all making it up in your mind, or you're right-wing Christian. That's what I've been called. Like when I was researching like the West Memphis 3, they kept calling me like a flyover Midwesterner. I live in California, but they were always trying to kind of like put me in a box that was somebody else could go, oh, see this guy, he's a right-wing hillbilly or something like that. So I think that you see these techniques being played out in real time. And I think they did it sophisticated. And that's what Bannon, this whole arrangement between Bannon and Epstein was to foment that approach to rehab Epstein. That was the whole point. And those communications that were probably meant to be private, that are now public, were actually a boomerang, the opposite effect. It showed what they were doing is trying to rehab a sexual deviant who's involved in porn creation, trafficking. He had friends. He was blackmailing people with that. So it's beyond blackmail and pedophilia. But yeah, so it's a great question, and I think it's one of those overlooked things in the Epstein where they need to look more into it. Is like, what's he doing to keep getting away with all this stuff? And if you look at the reports that came into the FBI intake reports, he's like bragging, I know everybody. I know judges. I know politicians. And you're never going to get away with this. He was really telling it to the victims. And they were all afraid. And a lot of them couldn't come out until after Epstein was dead and Ghislaine Maxwell was in jail. And even to this day, some of the victims are saying, I'm still being watched. So there's a lot of means by way. And this is kind of a standard thing in criminal acts, pedophilia groups, is like threats. We're going to get your parents. We're going to get you. you're going to end up in jail. If you go back to the Franklin scandal, all that stuff,
Mm.
they put a number on the victims. So the perps got away, and the victims were like, well, they put one of them in jail. She was complaining, and I forgot her name, but they stuck her in jail. So
Yeah. Before we get back to Berkowitz, you had mentioned several times the drops themselves are bad enough. You can't imagine what the unredacted materials are like. Do you think the public will ever get a hold of those, notwithstanding the fact that the Disclosure Act, which is law, dictated as much? They seem to be holding back quite a bit. I can only imagine after your deep dive into them what's in that stuff.
me too. I mean, this is stated on the record by Blanche, who's our acting attorney general, who
Todd
literally
Blanche?
went through and he said that there are 2.3 million files. This is not me talking. This is him. This is actually almost a verbatim quote. There are 2.3 million files that we didn't put out because they depict torture, death, and child porn. So imagine what's come out. There's like 2.3 million files depicting the most horrible stuff imaginable. So whether those are ever unredacted is not. Here's the other angle on this. A lot of people don't know how vast the redaction effort was. It literally involved, once Trump came into office back in January of 2025, it involved like 500 FBI agents working overtime, spending millions of dollars redacting all of these files over and over. So, and I mean, that's why these files, when you go through, one of the impressive things is how much stuff is redacted. And they didn't do a perfect job because there are lots of duplicates where the redactions are not consistent. But whether those ever come out to the public, thank you. Whether they ever come out to the public is another question. And I hope these are things that happen that are kind of like fortunate boomerangs. Because of their redactions, you can actually look at the stuff that may be really dark, but they've redacted, but you can put the pieces up and then assume what's going on, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's one video on there where like they're at a big party in some island. There's hundreds of people, bottle service. Like if you've been to a club, high end bottles, $100, $200, everybody's partying. And there's one kid, there's a literal child, like she looks 14 or 15. They have her redacted out, but they have her in kind of like, she's not dressed like an Amish person, let's put it that way. But you can ascertain and you can see what they're doing. It's not that hard to figure out. Epstein and the group and Maxwell are putting this woman out on display for adults, or this girl, this young traffic victim. I don't know her name, but then you're like, okay, so this is verifying this again. So this actual redactions kind of like it allowed people to like make connections that weren't there. So the EFTA, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, that did have success. It's not a very well written piece of legislation. If you read legislation, often it's like 1,000 pages long. The EFTA was one page, and it was based upon the presumption and the assumption that there was a list. So they wanted the list of like the perps, and they actually proffered that list. It never made it into the media, is my understanding, but they put it out and they just kind of slide it out, and they hope nobody will cover it. But what they should have done is ask for unredacted things and a means by which that they could see it unredacted in a clever way. They use every trick in the book to curtail understanding what's in that. For people who don't know, like there's lots of civil litigation that takes place, and there's huge litigation, and you have discovery process, which means your person you're suing, who's suing you can see their stuff. There are rules on discovery, so you have to like give your information in a tab book with a table of contents where people can see it. They didn't even do that in this for the American people. They just shoved these huge data sets with really no like, okay, here's all his financial documents, here's all the pictures, here's all the stuff that we got from the. It's just total like they threw all the papers up in the air, shoved them together, and said, here. Like that's what they did. They got away with it. Blanche got away with it. These guys are really on the, I mean, as a lawyer, I really mean this. all of these guys are live like on like for criminal. They're exposed for criminal charges for obstruction of justice. All of them: Bondi, Patel, Bongino, and Blanche, because the political system is probably going to change here by the end of the year. And you want to see fireworks, baby. This isn't going away.
Despite reluctance on the part of the president to
Because he's part of it. He's part of it.
Yeah.
Kushner, I hate to say this, but the Epstein network is in the administration right now. Kushner is a platinum, highest card-carrying member who's close social friends with Epstein, going to parties and premieres of films and living it up in New York City. He's in the same
Lutnick.
social circle. And they
Lutnick.
lied about everything, but it's him, Kushner, and Lutnick live right next door to Epstein, and Trump is there. They're lying. Like, oh, I wasn't friends with him after 2005. And then you see emails in there that say the Trump sons are hanging out with Epstein in Mar-a-Lago in 2017, 2018.
Well, maybe in 60 years, like the JFK files, we'll get those fully released.
It's a sad truth. I mean, that's what we pay taxes for, is to be lied to. And this is really dark. Like, JFK is very dark. But this is like baby trafficking, and there's babies missing, and there's kids being abused. Like, this is like the story of him he was into Lolita, Nabokov's Lolita. There's no question about it. But that's the narrative they put to the public. It's way, way darker than that, guys. I'm not kidding.
In terms of forensics for and ballistics for Berkowitz's gun, it matched the crimes, and the killings stopped. At least the purported killings stopped after his arrest. How do the proponents of the multiple shooters theory explain this, and what counter evidence do you know exists to that? Because a lot of people, law enforcement at the time, they hang their hat on this. Stopped. We haven't linked any more crimes. He's in jail. End of story.
Right. I think it was the snub nose 44, right? So that was the kind of bullet that they were using, or the forensics they used. So that was tied. The story is that they just passed it among themselves. So, like, this is your job, and here's the crime, and now you go out.
Makes
and that's
sense.
a lot of those things. A lot of it's not criminal groups, occult groups. You commit crimes to be part and let in farther into the group. You have to blood in or something weird like that. So I think, in my opinion, that's what they were doing. But it's also a convenient way to pin it all on Berkowitz. You have to ignore so many facts, and one is just those things you said. The pictures that were taken do not look like Berkowitz. He's very distinctive looking back at that time, and they don't look like him. And there's women involved. And then also these sophisticated letters that are coming out in his handwriting that isn't his, that are handwritten. And there's just so many little minor things that just aren't consistent with just Berkowitz. I do think Berkowitz is involved. I think he's involved in a lot of other crimes. That's one of the reasons why he's maybe not talking, is because he's done other bad stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, there's like a cleanup around the Son of Sam. Like, people died, like her car, like shot, like horrible stuff. Like,
If it wasn't just pure avarice on the part of Berkowitz alone, what do you think the motive might have been for the loose group of individuals, like thrill killing, trying to up street cred, power recruitment, occult rituals, aside from the terrorizing aspect of it, which the Zodiac, as you mentioned before, also enjoyed as well. What do you think the evidence suggests the ultimate motivation to be?
I think these guys really become like almost like their own kind of like mini god, and they want to impose their will on things for whatever reason. They always want, at the very top, they always want some kind of change in the culture, into their culture. And I think maybe that was the externalization, is the Zodiac, and the Sons of Sam is like that. And so they just get darker and darker. And I think that's I would say that almost like cults and the occult are like drugs where you need to keep doing stuff to get a bigger thrill. So I think
Mhm.
it's like you go through gradations and then it always ends up in human sacrifice. There's very similar things between Zodiac and Son of Sam and the Beast of Florence killings are almost the same. And the Beast of Florence is also the same. Like they tried to target one guy, but there was one instance where the two couples that they killed couples in lovers' lanes above Florence, but the so-called Beast, they only made it one person, and it would happen at night. Everything happens at night, but like there was one instance where the couples parted, like bodies were found in separate parts. So if they separated, you had to have two people to catch them, at least two people.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting. So I think that also there's like a ton of occultism involved in those beats of horns, like real brutality and the creation of fear, right? So fear on the population. So I think to answer your question, I think it's it's part of their religion, like it's to do horrible stuff.
Do you think before we wrap up, do you think with modern forensics, cold case techniques, greater perspectives on serial killers, cults, that there's one piece of evidence or new angle that would change the debate and kind of settle this once and for all? Dismiss the lone wolf. Do you see there being a breakthrough other than Berkowitz himself spilling his beans?
I think that it's already happening. Like it's just conversations like this. People are realizing there's more to the story than they were told, maybe by the media. And that the video, I'll send you the video. Maybe you can add on to this if you want, or you can edit it in. But that video shows like a real journalist. I forgot the guy's name. He's really a great guy on A&E, but he's actually doing real like investigative journalism. So I think that they were out there. They just were minimized. They were just not emphasized. And you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Like a guy like Epstein's a perfect example of a guy whose surface life is nothing because he's just operating behind the curtain constantly. Like there's no oversight on this guy. Like what the heck is this guy doing? And a lot of these occultists, that's the way they work. They just you don't know what they're doing behind the surface. They just have a surface job or something like that. So I think that public awareness and Sons of Sam is a perfect example. It's like, hey, there's more to the story. It literally ends up with a guy who was implicated in the Arliss Perry murders, who was a security guard that night. He was a suspect back in the day, back in '74, but he ends up shooting himself. So you see the long term consequences of like, why would he do that? If he was innocent, he would just walk out and go, hey, whatever. You don't run. You don't have to. Uh, so I think that people are understanding there's a lot more to these stories, and there's really great researchers out there, Dana Duda, uh, Criminal Chris, and so many who are willing to look back and see it's part of like a larger cultural phenomenon. It really is, and it really goes back all the way into time. Like if you back, there is people join groups and secret societies, which are all over the Epstein files. There's actually a Zodiac secret society of only 12 members that's mentioned that nobody really even knew about. And it literally had like the head of the Federal Reserve and all these people over there. And then they're like Epstein. One is another one's called Killing Kitties that I'd never heard about. And then this one that just got revealed by Teal, which was called not Exodus. I forgot the name of it. But this is like other bigwigs getting together and making plans and plotting. So these are just like, and I think it was his name was Owen Benjamin, saying he's a comedian. He does a lot of social commentary, but he said the ones denying the conspiracy are the conspirators, and I think that's a really great statement. I want to rip it off, but I will give him credit for that. But I think that goes back to the people who sang Satanic Panic.
Well, it certainly is, as you point out all the time. The public seems to be, less apt to dismiss, conspiracy theories in in a a very negative light. That's been a technique before. There's just simply so much information out there, and so much, as Alex Jones has pointed out, so much conspiracy theory has become fact, and I think there's probably more to come with this. I don't think we've seen the last of it. I want to in a future episode go into another guy that really seems to be shrouded in some mystery too, and that's Michael Aquino. I know you're quite familiar with his work as well. Lot of meat on that bone, and specifically the link to the military and these sort of psyop operations that, as you pointed out during our discussion today, are most certainly going on still today.
Aquino's like in every like weird military base he's involved with: Presidio, Offutt, Fort Benning, and Fort Wahucha, which I never heard about until this Charlie Kirk thing and the investigation by Candace Owens. Like, okay, so he's there. Like, wow, this is amazing. Like, then the Fort Wachuca and the statements that she's uncovered are like tied to Kirk is real tell. So, which I think is in Arizona. Yeah.
We'd love to have you back as always, but until then, where can the fans keep up with your excellent podcast? I know you've got a Patreon, and as a bonus, you've got your 4 YouTube channels back.
Yeah, so I got 4 YouTube channels. I post on X a lot, often. I'm not censored there as far as I know. Rumble. I have a Patreon, like you mentioned. 5 books on Amazon. You can also watch my documentaries on my Patreon. It's just $5 a month. It's not too much, but I appreciate all the support, and I appreciate you having me back on. It's great to talk with you again. Yeah,
always fascinating, William. Look forward to the next time, and as always, encourage the fans to check out William Ramsey Investigates. It's right up there in my listens, and for good reason. You won't find this level of detail and analysis anywhere else. So thanks once again for coming on tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, fans, that's it for this edition of the Cheap Productions podcast. Make sure you like this video, leave a comment, always responding to your feedback and appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Jack Kilby. Thanks for watching.